Hello everyone, welcome to a new video and welcome to any new viewers who have decided to click on. Thank you for clicking on this video, and today, as you can tell from the title, I will be doing something new. I'm hoping that this is going to be the first of a series in which I talk about a book that I've read, but also the film adaptation that I've also watched. And I've been wanting to do this for quite a while, and today, as you can tell from the title, the book and movie adaptation that I'm going to be discussing will be Walter Tevis's The Man Who Fell to Earth and Nicolas Roeg's adaptation of the same name. The Man Who Fell to Earth was written by Walter Tevis and it was published in 1963. And we're following an alien named Thomas Jerome Newton, but for all intents and purposes, I'll just be calling him Newton from now on, who comes from this planet called Antheia, which is much more significantly, advanced compared to Earth. However, they have been through several nuclear wars that have devastated the planet. There are little to no resources, and the Antheian population is pretty much at around 300. That's all that's left of them. And so the Antheian government has devised a plan, basically. They have been sort of keeping tabs on Earth, observing them, and they have basically taken Thomas Jerome Newton, and have sent him on a one-man ship to Earth. And the plan is that he takes Antheian technology, which is much more advanced, introduce it into human society, and then patent it. And then from that, he amasses a large fortune that he is supposed to use to create a rocket. This rocket is supposed to go to Antheia, pick up the rest of his people, and then bring them to Earth pretty much as refugees. Newton basically is successful with this plan. He is able to patent Antheian technology. He is able to amass a large fortune and begin construction on a rocket that is meant to go home. However, along the way, Newton's feelings of alienation, his feelings of strangeness among humans, starts to get to him, and it begins to crush him in a way, and eventually begins to start turning to human vice, particularly drinking, and he actually becomes quite alcoholic. He only keeps like a very tight-knit circle of acquaintances, mainly two people, a young woman who he befriends called Betty Jo, and then a Dr. Bryce, who is meant to be part of a scientist that is part of the creation of this rocket. Pretty soon he eventually confides to Bryce, who finds out that he is an alien. However, apparently the US government has been keeping track of Newton, has been keeping an eye on him, and take him in, where they begin doing evaluations on him. One evaluation actually involves eye x-ray, which ends up blinding Newton since he is very sensitive in the eyes. However, due to the bad press about having a well-known head of an organization getting blinded, he is eventually released, but the government still keeps an eye on him. At the end of the book, Newton, although he is rich, is pretty much a sad, depressed alcoholic. So moving on to my overall thoughts about The Man Who Fell to Earth once I read it. Aside from the fact that it is a bleak novel, it's one of the more bleak science fiction novels I've come across. I noticed that while I was reading it, it almost felt like I wasn't reading a sci-fi novel. In the fact that it's almost contemporary in the way that was written, or very realist. That alien element is kind of subdued. And I think because the major reason is that this is a very human book, because it is, the main crux of it, I believe, has to do with this feeling of alienation, being unable to communicate or relate to anybody or anything. I mean, that is the story of The Man Who Fell to Earth. It's just exaggerated to the point where the character is an alien. It's a short novel. It's like a bit over 200 pages, but what I really enjoy about it was just the nuance to the characters. They're very realistic. They're very human. Even Newton, who towards the end of the novel becomes like more human than he would like to admit. They're very flawed. And by the end of the book, as the book continues, it's not like cliche, oh, we've learned our lesson, we've become better people, that sort of thing. No, they're flawed and they remain flawed. And yet there's just a lot of nuance that Walter Tevis puts in these characters that make them feel like flesh and blood. They don't have much meaning in their lives, and they're just trying to cope. Okay, so how does Nicolas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth relate or compare to the original story? So I'm just gonna first run off, like, what I would believe to be the major differences between the movie and the book. So for the first one, they do leave out the larger context in the story. So The Man Who Fell to Earth was written in the 1960s, and I think a lot of books that were written at the time were heavily influenced by the Cold War. In the original novel, it is mentioned that several countries, including the US, have in their possession nuclear weapons. And the Antheans, after, keeping an eye on Earth, have predicted that in about 10 years tops, Earth will follow in the same path as Anthea. This is gone in the film adaptation. Another difference is just Noon himself, his relationships and his mannerisms. In the novel, he's much more, strict or very stiff, and he's very hands-off in the sense. In the movie, however, Noon develops a relationship, a romantic and a physical one, with the Betty Jo character. But in the book, she's Betty Jo. They give her a new name here. It's Mary Lou, which is odd because that is the name of another character from a Walter Tevis science fiction novel, Mockingbird. But anyway, yeah, he begins to fall in love with her, and then they enter a physical relationship. Another thing that the movie focuses on is this tackling this capitalist structure. And there's a huge subplot about these corporations who've noticed how Newton's organization has it's becoming a monopoly, and they don't like that. So they're more or less trying to take Newton down. Now, the differences that I discussed were more or less differences that are related to the plot. I think the overall major difference between the original novel and then the film adaptation is the tone. For instance, like I mentioned, the original novel, it's very realistic. But Nicolas Roeg decided to go for a more surreal approach to the story when he decided to translate it from literature to a visual medium. And you can really tell it from not only the shots that were taken, the cinematography, but the editing, especially the editing. There's a lot of shots of just going over the beautiful New Mexico landscape. There'll be times when we're hyper-focusing on a certain object, and there'll be scenes in which there'll be cuts in which we'll be seeing Noon's family and his planet. And basically, it is the POV of someone who is a stranger, trying to absorb the surroundings, take in everything, but also dealing with the memories of the life he left behind. Also, I have to talk about David Bowie's performance. First of all, I love this casting, not only because I'm a fan of David Bowie, but if you've read the book and you heard the description, he actually fits it quite to the T. He's meant to be very pale, very tall, angular, fragile looking, and yeah, that pretty much fits David Bowie's description. I think he does a good job of portraying a stranger, someone who looks out of place, who does look a bit awkward. But then another thing that I really like is that he's able to portray this vulnerability of ultimately someone who is at the mercy of absolute strangers. One thing that I have noticed on subsequent watchings of the film is this emphasis on abandonment. In the book, Noon is released publicly, basically, but he is forever being trailed and monitored by the government. However, in the film, he's basically abandoned and forgotten. He's stumbling around drunk and discovers that his prison doors are unlocked and that no one is guarding him. As if he's not important anymore. He's not worth the time and effort, and then he just ends up leaving. And the thing is, he's been abandoned and forgotten not just by the scientists, the government that have taken him, but by the people he's grown close to, Bryce and Mary Lou. They've basically moved on with their lives. Yes, they are forever changed by their interaction with Newton, but ultimately they have moved on. They have learned to live a life without him. Now, is this a film that I would recommend everyone? Not really. If you're an average moviegoer who prefers just like a straight line story with more or less answers given to you, I wouldn't recommend this. If you're into arty films, if you're a fan of David Bowie, if you're very open to unconventional surreal storytelling, then yes, I would say give The Man Who Fell to Earth a try. Yeah, it's definitely a unique film and a very unique adaptation of the original novel. It definitely goes a different route with the tone that it decides to tell this story. And I really appreciate it for that. In its own way, it is a classic. And I ended up giving it 4 stars. One element that I would like to discuss on its own is a lot of references to the mythological character of Icarus. It's really emphasized in the book. There are even sections that are titled Icarus Falling, and then the last one is called Icarus Drowning. And then in the film adaptation, there is a scene where the character Bryce receives a book that has the painting, Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. In the novel, Bryce actually owns the painting. He owns a copy of that painting. But I do like how, the film adaptation does emphasize it a bit, though not as much as the book. And yeah, the story of the fall of Icarus, if you know of it, is very much the story of Newton. In a way, you can say that Newton's fall is much more tragic than Icarus's fall. Newton came as, this almost mystical being with a very noble purpose. And by the end of the story, he is reduced to a sad, depressed drunk who can, help himself, let alone help his family or his people. And it's because he has been taken in by us. He was ultimately broken by us, swallowed up by humanity just the way that Icarus was swallowed up by the sea. I think what makes this story so unique and so special from other science fiction novels that I have come across is the way that it treats the human component. This isn't a story about humanity learning about its flaws and then rising up to become something better. This is very much a story that puts a mirror in front of humanity and shows us our flaws, particularly this very frustrating ability we have of turning away or just ignoring something wondrous, whether it's like a man who fell from the stars, or turn away from something disastrous, potentially disastrous, like an impending nuclear annihilation. This frustrating ability to just dip our heads in the sand and ignore, as long as our own lives are doing okay, then, so what? And I think this story also, it taps in to this very human desire that I think we all have, and that is to relate to others, to be able to honestly and sincerely communicate with another person. This discomfort with this inability to find someone whom we can talk to whom we can make ourselves understood. This, almost soul-crushing loneliness that even though we're surrounded by a lot of people, the fact that they cannot understand us, still frustrates us, still alienates us, still makes us feel like the other. And yeah, both the book and the film, I feel, really know how to tap into that concept, into that idea. And they both express it in very different ways, but ways that I feel are still effective. So those were my thoughts and feelings on the story of The Man Who Fell to Earth, both the book and the film adaptation. Thank you once again for clicking on this video and listening to me discuss my thoughts. Hopefully I get to do more of these videos. These are fun. And I would recommend the book, and if you do enjoy the book, maybe give the film a look. And once again, thank you for stopping by and listening, and I'll see you next time.